And now it's time for our children's moment. This is also our children's offering time. So don't forget to set your offerings aside at home in your jar or your container. Now for our lesson today, we're going to be talking about this word that's written right behind me, the very colorful word. What does it say? It says promises, and there's even a colorful rainbow next to it. Now you older kids, you probably already know the story, and you know that when I'm talking about a promise, why there might be a rainbow there. I want you to think really hard about the word promise. What does promise mean? Well, promise means when you say that you're going to do something, or if somebody promises something to you, they are promising, they are saying that they are going to do something or that something's going to happen. Have you ever made a promise to someone? Has somebody ever made a promise to you? Now, what about if somebody made a promise to you and then they broke their promise? That means that they didn't do what they said they were going to do. Sometimes it's just an accident, like mom or dad might promise you something will happen, but then something else comes up and they have to break their promise. Or what about if you promise something? What about if you promised a friend that you would sit with them at lunch, and then lunchtime came and you totally forgot and sat at a different table? Well, you broke your promise to them. Now, God makes promises to us in the Bible. All through the Bible, God is telling us again and again and again what's going to happen and what He's going to do. God makes so many promises to us. Now, when you think about sometimes a promise that mom or dad make to you that they have to break because they didn't know what was happening, maybe they promised you could have a friend spend the night over the weekend, but then grandma and grandpa came in town and they had to break their promise. Well, think about the promises God makes and think about the difference between a promise that you make or a promise that mom or dad makes. Sometimes we have to break our promise, but God never breaks His promise. What God says is true, and He will never go back on His promises to us. So to show you a story of God's promise, just one of the promises that God makes us, I'm going to read to you the story of Noah. I'm reading to you from the Jesus Storybook Bible published by Zondervan Kids. I want you to listen for that word promise. So as I read the story, listen for the word promise and what it means. Time passed and many people filled the earth. Everyone everywhere had forgotten about God and were only doing bad things all the time. God's heart was filled with pain when He saw what had happened to the world He loved. Everywhere was disease and death and destruction, all the things that God hates most. Now Noah was God's friend, which was odd in these days because no one else was. Noah listened to God. He talked to God. He just loved being with God, like you do with your best friend. Noah, God said, things have gone wrong. People have filled my world with hate instead of love. They are destroying themselves and each other and my world. I must stop them. First, we'll build an ark. Do you know how to build an ark? Well, neither did Noah. Luckily, God knew, and He would show him. A storm is coming, God told Noah, but I will rescue you. I promise. I'll send the animals to you, ones that creep and crawl and slither and slime and gallop and hop and bound and climb. And don't forget to pack everyone's food. The storm was going to wash away all the hate and sadness and everything that had gone wrong and make the world clean again. God had thought up a way to keep Noah safe, but Noah would have to trust God and do exactly what God told him. So Noah built an ark. That's short for a very large boat. Noah's neighbors came out to watch and point and laugh because they didn't believe Noah about the boat or the storm or needing to be rescued. And Noah must have looked rather silly. His boat was in the desert. The desert was nowhere near the sea, and there wasn't even a cloud in the sky. Why would anyone need an umbrella, let alone a boat? But Noah didn't mind so much what other people thought. He minded what God thought. So he did what God told him to do. When the ark was ready, God said, "All aboard!" And Noah's family and all the animals climbed inside. And then God shut the door. And it started raining for minutes that joined up into hours, that joined up into days, that joined up into weeks and weeks. And the rain joined into puddles, that joined up into rivers, that joined up into lakes, that joined up into a flood that covered the whole world. Their boat that had once seemed so big suddenly seemed very small. But in the middle of the huge storm, in the crashing waves, in all the thunder and lightning, through it all, God was with them. And God kept them safe for 40 long days and 40 long nights. Finally, the rain stopped. The sun came out and Noah threw open all the windows. "Hooray!" everyone shouted. Noah sent his dove out to explore, and it wasn't long before she brought him back a fresh olive leaf. Everyone knew exactly what that meant. She had found a tree and land. The water was going down. At last, the boat landed quite suddenly on top of a great mountain. As soon as it was safe, God said, "Out you come." And so they did, everyone skipping and dancing onto dry land. The first thing Noah did was thank God for rescuing them, just as he had promised. And the first thing God did was to make another promise. "I won't ever destroy the world again." And like a warrior who puts away his bow and arrow at the end of a great battle, God said, "See, I have hung my bow in the clouds." And there in the clouds, just where the storm meets the sun, was a beautiful bow made of light. It was a new beginning in God's world. It wasn't long before everything went wrong again, but God wasn't surprised. He knew this would happen. That's why, before the beginning of time, he had another plan, a better plan. A plan not to destroy the world, but to rescue it. A plan to one day send his own son, the rescuer. God's strong anger against hate and sadness and death would come down once more, but not on his people or his world. No, God's war bow was not pointing down at his people. It was pointing up into the heart of heaven. So what was it that God promised Noah? Well, first he promised that there was going to be a storm. But then he promised that he would rescue Noah from the storm. And then that last promise, when we see a rainbow, what was it that God was promising? He promised that he would never destroy the world again. Now, those are just a few of God's promises. What do you think God promises you in the Bible? What are some of the things that God has told you in the Bible that you know he's not going to go back on because he is God and he's going to keep his promise? Well, I know that God has promised that he loves me. God has promised that he loves you, and he will not break that promise. And I know that God has promised he will always be with me, no matter what. And I know he's promised he will always be with you. So no matter what's going on in life, whenever you see a rainbow, let it remind you that God has promised you over and over again so many things in the Bible, but most importantly that he loves you and he will never leave you. When you see that rainbow, let it remind you of God's promises that he will never, ever break. Have a great week. I can't wait to see you again soon.